On a cold December afternoon in Sycamore, Illinois, a little girl walked out of her home to return a high school band uniform and never came back. Witnesses saw her step into a stranger's car, a man everyone called Johnny. Months later, her tiny body would be found discarded in a field. And more than half a century later, someone would be convicted for her murder, only for the justice system to undo everything. This is the story of Maria Elizabeth, a child whose case was solved, unsolved, and reopened again, leaving a town haunted for more than 65 years. Before we go any further, please hit like so more people can see this case, and subscribe to the channel with all notifications on, so you never miss a cold case investigation. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. December 3, 1957, began like any other day in the quiet, snow-dusted town of Sycamore, Illinois. It was the picture of post-war American innocence, a town of 7,000 people where crime was something that happened in distant, shadowy cities, not here. In this world, parents trusted their neighbors, children ran freely, and doors were often left unlocked. Maria Elizabeth Ridulph, known to everyone as Maria, was a happy, energetic 7-year-old. Her mother, Frances, and her father, Michael, described her as endlessly curious, a bright spark in the family, a girl who always wanted to do just one more thing before coming inside. The Ridulph home stood on Center Cross Street, a peaceful neighborhood street. That afternoon, the air was biting cold, with a fresh layer of snow on the ground that muffled the sounds of the town. Maria put on her coat, her mittens, and her excitement. She wanted to go outside and play in the snow with her best friend and next-door neighbor, 8-year-old Kathy Sigmund. Frances Ridulph watched them go, two small figures in the vast white landscape of the yard. The sun was already setting as it does in the Midwest winter, casting long, blue shadows across the snow. The streetlights flickered on, their warm yellow glow creating small pools of light. The temperature was dropping fast, well below freezing. Still, the children laughed as they played a game they called trucks at the corner of their block, their footprints forming small, chaotic circles in the new snow. Nothing about that evening felt dangerous. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing warned the town of Sycamore that a nightmare was about to begin. Kathy Sigmund, in testimony given years later, would recount the moments that followed with chilling clarity. Around 6 p.m., as the girls were playing near a utility pole, a young man approached them from across the street. He smiled, a friendly, non-threatening smile. He looked to be in his early 20s, thin, with dark hair, and a soft, friendly voice. He introduced himself simply as Johnny. He knelt to their level, joining their game. He asked if the girls liked dolls. He joked with them. And then he offered to give them piggyback rides. In the context of 1957, this was not the immediate, terrifying red flag it would be today. He seemed like an older brother, a neighborhood kid. But then he asked them a strange question: "Do you want to go for a ride?" Kathy, being a year older, immediately said no. Maria, who was naturally trusting, sociable, and only 7, hesitated. Johnny laughed, bent down, and offered her a piggyback ride again. Maria accepted, climbing onto his back. He carried her a short distance down the block and back. At that moment, Kathy Sigmund made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She realized she wasn't wearing her mittens, and her hands were freezing. She told Maria and Johnny she was running inside her home to grab them. She was gone for only 2 or 3 minutes, 5 at the most. When she returned to the street corner, the world had changed. Maria was gone. Johnny was gone. The only things left were the footprints in the snow, which seemed to stop, and the sound of the cold wind. Kathy, confused, ran to the Ridulph house and knocked on the door, asking if Maria was there. She wasn't. When Maria didn't return home for dinner, Frances Ridulph initially assumed her daughter had simply lost track of time at a friend's house. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and the evening turned into a dark, frozen night, that casual assumption curdled into fear. By 8 p.m., the neighborhood was awake and active. Neighbors were combing the streets with flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness, shouting Maria's name. By 10 p.m., Frances Ridulph, now in a state of full-blown panic, called the police. By midnight, the Illinois State Police were involved. By dawn, what had begun as a small neighborhood search had transformed into one of the largest missing child investigations in state history. The small town of Sycamore became the national face of every parent's worst fear. Hundreds of volunteers, including local farmers, high school students, and factory workers, fanned out to search fields, backyards, barns, frozen riverbanks, and the railroad tracks that cut through the town. Helicopters flew overhead, their rotors beating against the cold air. State troopers went door to door, questioning every resident. The FBI, under the personal direction of J. Edgar Hoover, was called in. Sycamore, the town of unlocked doors, changed overnight. Parents locked their doors, many for the first time in their lives. Children were kept inside, their play suddenly confined to living rooms. Rumors spread like wildfire. Every dark-colored car, every unfamiliar face, was a source of suspicion. And Kathy Sigmund, only a child herself, had to sit with stern-faced detectives and describe Johnny. She described his face, his hair, his voice, his thin build. From her memory, a composite sketch was created. It was broadcast across the region, reproduced in newspapers from Chicago to Des Moines. But weeks passed. Christmas came, and the Ridulph family's presents for Maria sat unopened. The snow melted, and Maria's trail went cold. On April 26, 1958, 5 long months after Maria disappeared, a couple from Rockford was searching for mushrooms in a rural, wooded area near Woodbine, Illinois, more than 100 miles from Sycamore. Under a tangle of brush and leaves, they stumbled upon something. It was the skeletal remains of a young girl. The body was decomposed, left to the elements of a harsh winter. But the tattered clothing was still there. An undershirt, a coat button. Dental records would soon confirm what the Ridulph family already feared in their hearts. It was Maria. Her body had been discarded in a desolate, isolated area, far from home. Because decomposition was so advanced and the forensic science of the time was primitive, the exact cause of death could not be determined, though it was ruled a homicide. The nation mourned for the Ridulph family. The case had become so symbolic of lost innocence that the president himself, Dwight D. Eisenhower, sent a personal telegram of condolence. Yet even with national attention and the FBI's involvement, the case stalled. There were no solid suspects. There were no reliable witnesses besides a child. There was no physical evidence. And there were no answers. Maria's case became a legend, a ghost story. It became one of the oldest unsolved child murders in American history. Until someone came forward, decades later. For years, one name had occasionally surfaced in whispers and old police files: John Tessier. He was a local young man, 22 at the time, who had lived in Sycamore. He matched the rough age described by Kathy. He had dark hair. He was known in the town. But the original 1957 investigation had quickly cleared him. He had a solid, verifiable alibi. On the day of the kidnapping, Tessier was a member of the U.S. Air Force, stationed in Rockford, 40 miles away. He had documentation and witnesses proving he was traveling on the day of the kidnapping. Case closed. Or so it seemed. Decades passed. Detectives retired. Filing cabinets became dusty relics. John Tessier changed his name to Jack McCullough and lived a life in Washington state. Then, in 1994, Tessier's mother, Eileen, was nearing death. In a cryptic, distressed conversation with her daughter, she muttered a message: John did it. But she wasn't talking about Maria. She was talking about something involving sexual abuse against her own daughters. And yet, years later, this statement would be taken out of context, misinterpreted by an investigator, and twisted into a supposed deathbed confession related to Maria's case. Time blurred. Memories twisted. And a case already fragile became impossibly complicated. In 2008, the case was officially reopened. Kathy Sigmund, now an adult named Kathy Chapman, was re-interviewed. She was shown an old photograph of John Tessier from 1957, now known as Jack McCullough. It was not a lineup, it was a single photo. She looked at the face of the young man in the military uniform. And, flooded with the emotions of that winter night, she said she recognized Johnny. Her memory, more than 50 years old, now became the single, powerful cornerstone of a new investigation. Prosecutors, armed with this identification and the misconstrued deathbed confession, pushed forward. In 2011, Jack McCullough, a 72-year-old man living in a retirement community in Seattle, was arrested and charged with the kidnapping and murder of 7-year-old Maria Ridulph. This was hailed as a national triumph. A cold case, one of the oldest in the nation, finally solved after half a century. News stations celebrated. The community in Sycamore felt a profound sense of closure. The Ridulph family, including Maria's older brother Charles, believed justice had finally, miraculously, arrived. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. Very wrong. At the trial in 2012, the prosecution had no DNA. They had no fingerprints. They had no physical evidence linking McCullough to the crime, the victim, or the body. They had no hair samples, no fibers, no murder weapon, and no confession. They had no witness except one, a memory from 1957. But Kathy, emotional on the stand after all those years, testified that she was certain Jack McCullough was the man. The prosecution's case rested on discrediting McCullough's 1957 alibi, suggesting the old records were unreliable or that he could have made the trip from Rockford to Sycamore and back in an impossibly short window. That was enough. In 2012, Jack McCullough was convicted of Maria's kidnapping and murder and sentenced to life in prison. The town celebrated. A 55-year mystery was solved. Except it wasn't. A new state's attorney, Clay Rawlings, was elected in DeKalb County. He was troubled by the case and began a review. He uncovered evidence that had been available but ignored. He found the original 1957 police reports that cleared John Tessier. And he found the smoking gun, phone records. Not just any records, but newly uncovered, detailed records from the phone company. They proved that Jack McCullough had made a collect call from a post office payphone in downtown Rockford at 6:57 p.m. on the night of the murder. Maria was taken between 6 o'clock and 6:30 p.m. in Sycamore. In 1957, it was physically impossible to travel the 40 miles from Sycamore to Rockford, in traffic, in that time frame. His original Air Force documents also placed him in another state for medical exams earlier that day. The timeline the prosecutors had insisted was possible wasn't. It was impossible. A judge reviewed the new case. And in 2016, in a stunning and dramatic reversal, Jack McCullough's conviction was vacated. The judge declared him wrongfully convicted and actually innocent. He was released from prison, an old man who had been jailed for a crime he did not commit. Maria's killer, whoever he was, remained unknown. And a case once celebrated as solved, a wound thought to be closed, was now violently, painfully, unsolved again. Over time, a different, more plausible suspect has quietly emerged in the minds of many investigators. A local man named William Johnny Kriegbaum. He matched Kathy's description, perhaps even more closely than McCullough ever did. He had a troubling background. He fit the age bracket accurately. He lived near the Ridulph home. His family even called him Johnny. He died in 1983, long before the case was ever reopened and long before Jack McCullough was ever charged. He was never formally charged. Some investigators and McCullough's own defense team believe he was the real abductor. But without evidence, the truth remains out of reach. For decades, Sycamore was a town haunted by the memory of a child taken too soon. The Ridulph family never found true peace. Maria's siblings, who had sat through the 2012 trial believing they had found the man, were now left with nothing but doubt and anger. Jack McCullough lost years of his life, his reputation, and his savings for a crime he didn't commit. And the true identity of Johnny, the man who stopped on a frozen winter evening to talk to two little girls, remains unknown. It is a case of a child stolen, a town shaken, a man wrongly convicted, and a killer who walked away untouched, likely living and dying without ever facing justice. Maria Elizabeth's case stands as one of the most complicated and tragic in American criminal history. It is a powerful, painful reminder that justice, when built on fragile 50-year-old memories and incomplete, manipulated evidence, can collapse under its own weight. It is a story of grief, confusion, and heartbreaking uncertainty. A case solved, then unsolved again. A trial won, then erased. A family given closure, then plunged back into the dark. It forces us to ask, how do you seek justice when time, and the people seeking it, erase the truth? What do you think really happened in this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, but please keep them respectful to the victim and her family. If you'd like to see more cold case investigations like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so more people can learn about these stories. If you have any information related to this case, even decades later, contact the authorities listed in official sources. Even a small detail can make a difference.